Good morning. My name is Gail Morton. Welcome to Conversations with the Sensational Six. Our topic today is expanding and enhancing self-compassion. And I like to think of this topic as simply another phrase for treat yourself like your own best friend. So most of us are really hard workers and we strive to meet our goals and to perform to the best of our potential in every moment. And these are all tremendously useful skills. And today we're going to share an alternative to consider, a way to achieve your goals through self-compassion, to live your life with self-compassion. With self-compassion, you value yourself because you are intrinsically deserving of care and concern, just like everyone else. Self-compassion means being at the heart of empowerment, learning, and inner strength. So as you consider this background for today, please join me as I pray us in with an invocation. So consider softly, gently closing your eyes or doing whatever is comfortable for you as I invite you to settle in now and immerse yourself in these words of prayer. Something wonderful, simply wonderful is happening through me right now. It is this thing called life. This life is my mind. It is my body, and this life is all of my affairs. I think it, I feel it, and I accept it just the way that it is, and just the way that it is not. I am so grateful for this one power, this one presence, this one infinite intelligence and vibrant energy that fills this and all sacred space. I give thanks knowing Spirit is right where each person here is today. And I celebrate knowing that each person here is guided and sustained in this space by this presence that expresses its love through each person's love in this world. And as deepest love, I know each heart that is present lives its life accordingly, so that everything that is said and thought in this time together honors this presence within. Please join me in saying, and so it is. So every week we like to introduce ourselves and share a fun fact to provide some insight as to who we are. So we picked a light one for this week. Today's fun question is, what is your favorite emoji? And Lori, why don't you start us off?
Well, I laughed when we came up with this question because I thought, I'm not sure I have a favorite emoji. I don't use them that often, probably smiley faces and hearts here and there. But one I wish I had, which I do not, is that. Why do we not have that in an emoji? Because that's probably would be my favorite and the one I would use most nowadays is the whole, oh my goodness. So that would be my favorite. I don't have it. If anyone has it, knows where I can find it, please let me know. Otherwise, it's just smiles and hearts because most of the text I share with people are joyous and making fun plans and discussing things that make me smile and open my heart. So I'm going to pass on to Gail.
Okay, well, Lori, there is one. There is that emoji, so I will have to get that to you. I actually downloaded mine as a virtual background, so here we go. This is my favorite emoji. It's the face with all the hearts dancing around it. And I guess I'll just stick with it. So I love this emoji because to me, it's like the equivalent of just sending so much love and joy to people through the text. And I am a big texter. I text with most of my friends and my family. Just because it's so easy and you can connect like so instantaneously. And to me, this is just the way that I can give my love through text in a big, big way, because this just tells me I so love you and it's joy and it's fun. And here's a message of love from me to you. So this would be my favorite emoji. And now I'm going to pass it on to Gail.
Thank you, Dale. And boy, that one says it all. I love it. So my favorite emoji is actually the baby angel emoji. And I'm sure you've seen it. It's that precious baby face with angel wings behind its back and with a halo above its head. And I really love this emoji because for me, it symbolizes innocence and purity and all things divine. So I tend to use it when I'm feeling tenderness and deep love for someone, particularly from afar. So with that, Cheryl, how about you? What is your favorite emoji?
Well, I like to send most of my stuff. A lot of times I send, and it's like the two hearts and then a smiley face in the middle and then two hearts on the other side. I don't know if y'all remember seeing that from me, but what I do is each time when I'm sending that out, I imagine that that smiley face is the person I'm sending it to, and they are surrounded and immersed in love on both sides, all around them. They've just surrounded with love, and that's why I like to attach that one, because I don't think that we show each other and we tell each other. And why do I do it in an emoji? Why don't I just say, I love you and I see you surrounded in love? But, it's like an easier way of just not putting yourself out there. So maybe it's more the emojis are the feelings that we have, but is that the only way we have to express them, I guess, is what I'm asking. But they're wonderful because they give you that little perk. And then I do have one other favorite, the one that's laugh out loud with tears running down your face, because I love to laugh and I love it when people send me things that are funny. And so I just like to let them know back, thank you for giving me my laugh for the day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad.
Cool. I don't use a lot of emojis. Usually I use memes that are usually Star Wars themed. That's some kind of satirical comment kind of thing. But the ones I'm using now are, let's see if you can see these. There you go. See that really funky, screwy face there? Isn't that a weird one? It's kind of blurry, but that's about it. So it's a great way to communicate, right? Just one little thing you can add to your expression.
And then lastly, me. Yeah, I'd have to say that I'm more of a meme guy, not a meme guy, but a meme guy. And I like the memes where you've created your own face. And so here's mine. Always a thumbs up. I like that because it makes it a little bit more personable. And there is that one, I've got one like that with the I could have had a V8 emoji. It's just fun. It's a great way of lightening a conversation and just making it more personable and more yourself. And so that I guess has to be it. Now we get on to our topic, and I'm going to lead off with that. And again, like Gail was saying, our topic today is self-compassion, how to expand and enhance that. And I've like to read a little bit out of The Science of Mind here. We're going to start low and bring ourselves up high. So on page 146, it is written, and it's a proverb. The prodigal son said, I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and I am no worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. That's the quote. Ernest Holmes says, this represents a theological state of mind which is quite common amongst us all. One of self-condemnation and personal distrust. He says this, it is morbid and detrimental to our welfare. A theological state of introspective morbidity, that is heavy, which might be classified as one of our worst mental diseases. Self-condemnation is always destructive and should never be indulged by anyone. It is always a mistake. That is some heavy stuff. And as soon as I read that, it reminded me of Dr. Joe's wonderful talk about taking flight when he used to be a flight attendant. And he did that whole spiel that you get before you take off where they drop the mask. And that's exactly what I want to talk about, that dropping of the mask. And they say, when that drops, put it on yourself first, then help others. one of the things that we do as human beings, as society, we go off and we help others, and we think that that's the right thing to do, which it is. I mean, we're all one. But they think that by helping others, they're actually creating a self-worth. And yet I see constantly people talking to themselves and about themselves in a very harmful way. We need, and this is what our subject is about, self-compassion. And there she is peeking. You can come on in. I got gremlins around here. But truly that, learning to love yourself, and that's one of the wonderful things about this teaching, is it starts off with self-love. It starts off by saying that God is not just here. God is here. And more than that, you are the totality, the embodiment of that spirit. In a sense, you are God. Now, a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their minds around that. And that's okay. Because for millennia, we've been taught as a social consciousness that we're less than, that we're not worthy. Have you ever heard of things like that? I'm sure you have. I've heard them. That's a lie. You are nothing less than God in action. And when you realize that and you embody that, all of a sudden, your chin's up, your shoulders are back. You walk around with that confidence. You understand that you are not just a part of this world. You are the embodiment of this world. And when you realize that, you come to understand that helping others is not really something outside of yourself. You find that you get more in return by helping others, because that love that you can now feel for yourself can now be expressed through action. And by doing so, you are showing someone else their value. So this is an inside job, and that's what we want to talk about today, is let's talk about fixing ourselves, maybe not even that, realizing the worth of ourselves and understanding that worth, which will then allow us to be able to help others. Because as we talk about in this philosophy, we are all one. We are only spirit in action. So there's nothing outside of itself, and so there's nothing outside of ourself. Only through helping others do we tap into the God self. But to be able to do that, we have to first start off with helping ourselves, realizing that love. You and I and everyone are nothing less than spirit in action. And so I'd like to open up this forum and allow others, my cohorts here, my soon-to-bes. There you go, my soon-to-bes. See what their thoughts, and let's expand this and let's have fun. Let's see where this journey takes us. And so I just open it up.
Okay, then I'll go.
I'll follow you, Lori. I'll follow Lori.
You know, I woke up thinking about something I either read or something somebody said to me many, many years ago. And it was, you will only allow people to treat you as badly as you treat yourself. And in that moment, that just stuck. And I thought, oh, I even though I wasn't in science of mind at the time, and I think I intuitively began to understand in that moment that everything I experienced outside of me was a reflection of everything I was experiencing inside of me. And that I had to shift from trying to fix everything out there to understanding that it needed to shift in here. And how I shifted that was through beginning to have compassion for myself, self-love, kindness, just basic kindness. Because what I was finding was I was unkind to myself. I didn't understand who I was. I didn't understand my innate value, not because of anything I did, but simply because of who I was. And once I got that, everything outside of me shifted. Um, the world began reflecting back to me how I felt about myself. And I continue to work on that. It is a journey, that noticing that self-talk and when I am not being kind to myself, and would I ever say those things to anyone else? And the answer, of course, is no, I wouldn't, because I am a kind person. And I always see it as a sign to look for a belief, an errant belief that is still in there. If I begin to talk to myself in a way that is less than compassionate and kind, there is a belief that is still lodged in there somewhere that I haven't healed or shifted to something more positive. And that's a good thing. So instead of all of a sudden, I have this conversation that is less than kind with myself, and I go down the rabbit's hole and I start to beat myself up for what I just beat myself up for, and one thing leads to another. I can stop and say, okay, what am I believing in this moment? And what can I believe and what can I understand in this moment that will change my experience of self and therefore change my experience of everything around me? So that was a huge aha for me many, many years ago. And here it is, and it's still operative. It's still something I continue to look at. So I found it extremely useful, and I hope you do too.
Thanks, Lori. As William was talking, I was having these visions of my grandmother, who was just salt of the earth, and she always cooked. She was the only one that cooked for our family gatherings. And I remember that she would not sit down and eat. It was all about taking care of everybody else. And I don't even know if she ever did eat. I think she maybe got a little snack in between, but she was always up and doing everything. And I realized that's where my programming comes from. I learned it's about everybody else and your needs are absolutely last. And then coming into Science of Mind and looking at that as being not the truth about ourselves, and how, like what William said, and I was so glad you brought up what Dr. Joe speaks to regarding the putting the oxygen mask on our face first, because we really can't be of much good to anybody if we're depleted and we're not filled with love. And so for me, on my journey to coming to know who I am and to see that self-love and self-compassion is priority, what I do is I've just become very aware of my thoughts that come up that are self-condemning, like what William was saying about. And I love how strong Ernest Holmes is. I mean, he makes it absolutely clear that we absolutely cannot indulge in self-condemnation. And you get it after you read that passage or after William read it. So for me, I've become very aware of when I'm being mean to myself, and I've actually caught myself getting into that self-talk about judgment and why did you do that and all that stuff. And I'll have this moment of observation and clarity where I will say, oh my God, Dale, be kind to yourself, be loving to yourself. So it's all that reprogramming. And doesn't it feel good when we take our own side and we say, you know what, you did the best you could. So just be in the love, be in the flow, and let that stuff go. And it feels so good to make that pivot into self-love and self-compassion. So that's what I have to share. I'll toss this back out to the others to comment.
I'd like to jump in. I think that one of the things that Dale said, excuse me, we always get them confused with the names. But what Dale said, what really struck me is how, by observing how our parents or our grandparents or other people have treated themselves, we've trained ourselves to treat ourselves the same way. And I think sometimes that especially when you're a parent, there's no choice. You have to put your needs aside. You're lucky if you get a shower in the first 3 weeks, it's like, because there's just so much involved. But the thing is that at some point where do you keep training yourself to put yourself in the back seat always, to always put yourself behind and not being compassionate and loving to yourself and answering your own needs and your own desires? I mean, yes, I know that there are other people that are dependent on you, but that's where self-compassion comes in. It's about letting go of old thoughts and old things that cause so much suffering for us. And then we can always go out and dig up that bone and beat ourselves up with it. You know, every time we get into that place where we're feeling less than, or something's happened that you're feeling like, oh gosh, then we can immediately jump back into that cesspool of I'm not good enough. You know, we can swim around in there for a while and then we can wallow in the mud. But like Dale said, the thing is, the trigger is to recognize it immediately. And like Lori said too, and William, recognize it and know that you are God in action. You are right now expressing God. You are responsible for taking care of this body temple that you have. You are responsible for loving yourself first, because you can't love anybody else until you do. If you don't know what love feels like to yourself, how could you possibly give that to someone else? What do you want to give them? Your I'm not good enough love? You know, I mean, come on. Your love is perfect. It's whole. It's complete. Just like you are. In God's eyes, we are perfect. We are whole. We are complete. We are his divine expression right here on earth. And so my job is to express that love and that compassion to everyone, not just outside of me, but me as well. And I give you permission. It's not selfish to love yourself. You have permission from all of us. Love yourself. That's what you're here for. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Awesome, Cheryl. Thanks. Just a reminder that if you have any questions or comments, to put them in, and we'll be happy to share them with all of us that are on and listening. You know, it's funny, whether we've been in this philosophy a day or decades, you know, when we do the 5 steps of prayer, there's one life, that life is God, that life is my life. So how come from that we can't think we're totally friggin' awesome, right? Because there's one life, that life is God, that life is my life. Except when it comes to a million other things, we say, well, when Spirit, as the wisdom of William was coming through earlier, I thought of a home study assignment for all of us. And we don't usually dish that out here, but I'm going to now. So before you go to bed tonight, what if you look in front of a mirror and say 2 things? And you look at your reflection. I don't mean your back to the mirror. And you look at the reflection saying, you are awesome. And then say, I am awesome. And feel how easy or difficult that is. And tomorrow, do it for 5 minutes. Just to be in it. You know, when Cheryl was talking about how do we get these things installed when we saw them from our parents, you've heard me mention before, I'm a caregiver for my parents. And it's amazing, rewarding, and also to look at the behaviors that one is like, oh my God, that's where that got installed from, and my button inside me and everything else. But her talking about, you know, I am awesome, you are loved, I am loved. That's the main way we can get around this, is how often and constantly we can. And for those of us who have been doing spiritual practice like that for a long time, the results show up quicker the more often and the more deeply we do that. And I'll give you a kind of embarrassing example. So yesterday, my mom has Parkinson's, and she's been having a challenge with some swallowing. So the neurologist felt she needed to have another pill a couple of months ago, and that's been helping some. But sometimes she'll still have this choke, and it's instant. And you know, half her medications come up, or half her breakfast, and it's just a done deal. So I was in the garage where my office is, turning on my air conditioning, setting up for a Zoom meeting. And I walk in, and my parents are really sweet people. But my dad was still reclining, reading his book, and said, Mom needs help. Now, it was probably only seconds that this happened that she had sped up. So I go over there and she's still got, she's trying to contain herself, and she's not changed her recliner position or brought the garbage can up to her and that kind of stuff. So I just help her with that stuff. And of course, part of my mind is saying, get your up out of the chair and help her for the seconds and holler, Brad, and we'll get it working. And before I got my mom even halfway out of the room to the restroom, that was gone. And I didn't realize it was gone until I started my practitioner appointment about an hour later with my prayer partner. And I shared that and I said, it was really great. And I know it's because of my deeper practice, a more constant practice, that when I'm a jerk, because I'm really clear that's what my thinking was, it can go away faster. And that's the same thing for thinking, I am an awesome individualized expression of God, period. And the more we do that, the less time we're going to forget. Anybody else want to share?
So I'll jump in, Brad. Thanks so much for sharing that story. Our topic today is all about enhancing self-compassion. And have you ever noticed that the word self-compassion oftentimes includes practicing self-compassion? And in the very beginning, William talked about the prodigal son. And, the prodigal son, I think many of you are familiar with the story. Prodigal son was afraid to come back home because he was afraid of being criticized and being looked down upon based upon behaviors that he had engaged in. And this is where practicing self-compassion comes in, because for all of us, there are times when it's very difficult to show compassion towards ourselves. And oftentimes the reality is that self-compassion is needed because of the sting that often accompanies criticism. That's what the prodigal son was concerned about. And that's because criticism often contains grains of truth about ourselves. We hear that in the criticism. We know in the case of the prodigal son, that is exactly what we've done. But it also contains grains of untruth that pertain to the critic's perception, because we all have different perceptions. The prodigal son's father's perception was very different than the prodigal son. So because of this sting, though, we can tend to beat ourselves up. I know that I do, and ultimately miss the useful lesson. And that's where remembering and practicing self-compassion comes in. So practicing self-compassion, we can actually experience disappointment with greater calm, with greater understanding, because it truly is an opportunity then from which growth can follow. And that's what happens when we make a mistake or something goes wrong. It's really just the next step forward. We may not realize it, but that's actually what it is. We're growing from what we have just learned and experienced. And for our teaching, isn't one of our goals to always maintain that unshakable strength, independent of all external circumstances? That's practicing self-compassion. And practicing self-compassion creates a stable sense of self-worth. That self-worth that you know is the truth of who you are, because who you are has nothing to do and is never contingent upon what you've done, what you haven't done, upon looking a certain way, upon competing successfully. You are a divine being. Your nature is divine, and you can never be anything less than the most brilliant, amazing person on this earth. And that's where practicing self-compassion comes in, because you remember the truth of who you are.
I love that, Gail. And I go back to those of you that tuned in last week, our teacher, Dr. James Mellon. I go back to the three things that he teaches, and I must apply them to myself too. It's not just those outside of ourselves, but to forgive everything, including anything I'm holding against myself, any harshness. And I was somebody who was raised to be a perfectionist, like I think many of you on the panel as well. And it was honestly coming in my early, probably the first decade out of leaving home. Those were my biggest issues to cope with and to understand. And for me to just forgive myself for not being perfect, even though perfection is just, it's so elusive, and there's no way you can achieve it. And it's ridiculous because it's an externally created thing anyways, because we are perfect. We already are perfect as divine beings. And so for me, just to really get what that is, and as Dr. James teaches us, love only within yourself, forgive everything within yourself, and know who you are, obviously. And so for me, with this whole journey of self-love and self-compassion, I've seen, the energy is really heavy around that when you feel, and it's suffocating, and it's just so, as Ernest Holmes says, it's a killer, really. And I was trained by to be a practitioner by Dr. Maxine Kay, and she lightened up that kind of energy around us. Whenever you make a mistake, she would just say ta-da. And so whenever I make a mistake, I do that. I go ta-da, and all of that heaviness around condemnation. We're amazing, and we are spirit at work in action, as soon to be Rev William at CSLPD said.
I love that, Dale. I love the ta-da. I'm stealing that. It just changes the energy. Creating out of ta-da is so different than creating out of less than conversation. And I was going to go exactly where you went with the love only, forgive everything, and remember who you are. That all begins internally. It has to, before it can happen externally. Yeah, I have taken that as my personal vision statement, and it has been transformative. I don't waste a lot of energy and time. It becomes non-negotiable, the love only, and to forgive everything, and to stand in knowing and understanding who I am. And if you get that, as Dr. James always says, the other two take care of themselves. You don't even have to worry about those two. Understanding who you are, there's nothing, love is all there is, and there's nothing to forgive. We're always learning, we're always growing. And I also love what Gail said about that, criticism stinging. And one of the things that takes the sting out for me, whether it's external or internal, whether I'm criticizing myself or somebody is seemingly criticizing me externally, is to simply ask the question, what is there for me to see here? And to go back to, what do I want to create from this moment? Is there something for me to learn out of all of this? If I'm feeling less than, then there's something for me to look at. And that is such a simple question to ask as soon as that feeling, and to recognize that, what is that feeling inside of me? Because before I start to have the internal conversations that are less than compassionate, there's usually a feeling that precedes that, a sensation in my body. And so beginning to be curious, what are if you're, Brad might recognize this, Danger Will Robinson. From when I was a kid, I used to love Lost in Space, and I still use that phrase, Danger Will Robinson, when something begins to come up and I know it's not what I want to experience, and I know it's not what I want to create. I sometimes say to myself, Danger Will Robinson, let's shift away and back to remembering who I am, knowing who I am so completely that love is the only option, and forgiveness doesn't even come into the conversation, because my life is unfolding perfectly. Another James Mellon-ism that I absolutely love.
Oh, I know. He really filled us up with some great wisdom. Cheryl, did you want to say something? We do have a question, but if you had something, go for it.
Thing. Just another thing that we're talking about, you make mistakes, or what a lot of people call them is sins. You've sinned, shame on you, you naughty person. But what we believe is that a sin, if you take it from the literal translation of what sin is, it means to miss the mark, and it's an archery term. If you sinned when you were shooting an arrow and you missed the mark, then that's what it was. And somehow it became part of our everyday. If you missed the mark, then you sinned, but then it became really bad. So, oh my God, I've sinned. The 10 Commandments. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? But that's why I like this teaching so much. It's about being compassionate with yourself and knowing that you've missed the mark. It's okay. You missed the mark. Just pick yourself up, dust yourself up off, and get up and go do it again, do something again, but just don't stay in that place of being, beating yourself up, because then you run the risk of becoming a victim of whatever has occurred. And you don't want that. You just want to be gentle with yourself. I made a mistake. Okay, let's move forward. And thank you, Dale, for bringing that up, because that just reminds me so much about what we consider missing the mark. It's all it is.
All right, 6, stand and deliver time. This reminds me of something we would have heard in ministerial. Here we go. Given that God is love and compassion, why do you think that God has allowed mankind's thinking to evolve in such a way as to be so critical of self and others? Who would like to take that one on?
Okay. God didn't do anything. It's kind of like when I hear someone says the universe, the universe doesn't do shit except what we put into it. Excuse my languaging. Except what we put into it. So there's no outside energy, power, being, or anything else. But it's still fascinating how, probably at least in most Western culture, right, we still think of, even if we do spirit, I've even heard practitioners and ministers of years of experience still sometimes referring to spirit, that spirit did something. Spirit doesn't do anything. God doesn't do anything. Universe doesn't do anything except what we put into it. So let's think about that. Didn't mean to jump on you, wonderful person who shared that insight. But let's think about that. It's like, oh, wow. Well, of course, if I keep thinking so-and-so did this, there's no control for me. But when I realize they didn't do it, I did it, now there's control for me, and I can decide how I see something and how I'm feeling. Didn't mean to jump on that one, but wow, Brian.
I got one for that.
Jump in on that. Oh,
Go ahead.
It's about consciousness. That is how that scenario happens. Is one thing that helps me, or I like to think about in this philosophy, is that since everything is God, this pen, this piece of paper, everything I'm touching is nothing less than spirit. But it's at different levels of consciousness and awareness. So the difference between an amoeba and myself, again, is consciousness. So the idea of that question is how, let me see, what did it say? Allow mankind think, why do you think God has allowed mankind thinking and evolve in such a way to be so critical to self and others? Consciousness. We didn't realize and understand our connection to one another and to spirit. With that level of consciousness, we saw things as separate, outside of ourselves. And sometimes that's dangerous. Look at nature and how it evolves and how nature works. It's perfect and harmonious, but yet there's times where there's volcanoes that are spewing out and seem very destructive, but yet it's creating new land, birthing new areas. And then there's other places where there's fire and there's decay. It's all the cycle of life. It's all one thing happening. And so as we became conscious, not just of ourselves as being separate, we thought of things outside of ourselves as being scary and unfamiliar. And I think that that's kind of how that philosophy and that thought pattern evolved. Now, thousands of years, and here we are today. And how we think about spirituality is different than what we thought 200 years ago, 400 years ago. There was one or two people back in Plato's time, in fact, actually Plato himself, who was really part of the founders of this philosophy and this way of thinking, of the connection of everything. So, God hasn't allowed anything. God is just allowing life to unfold perfectly, because life is nothing less than perfect, because it's nothing less than spirit itself. It's our understanding and our comprehension of our connection to that, realizing our self-worth. And again, there we go, back into self-worth and self-love. How do we change that question? By loving ourselves, by finding the compassion within ourselves, by realizing the things that aren't true about us that have been told by others when we were younger, and we thought that somebody outside of ourselves had authority over our thinking. And one of the beautiful things about myself is that, yes, that happened to me, but I remember being berated and talked to, and going in my mind, going, that's not right. That's not who I am. That's not me. And so I never really bought into it. And that's why when I found this philosophy, it just resonated with me. It brought all that stuff that was underneath the surface. It brought it to the forefront and allowed me to expand and become the Reverend to be, which I am today.
I'd like to just, I know I've talked a
Oh,
lot.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I thought you were done. You said that who you
No,
are.
I was just. I'm sorry if I'm doing a sermon here, but I'll wrap it up. But basically, I just want everyone to know is that where we are here, the Sensational Six that's here today, you can be here as well. In fact, actually, you already are here, because this thinking that we're doing amongst ourselves and the questions, the interaction, is nothing more than the expansion, enhancing of spirit. So self-compassion is what it's all about. Okay, go ahead, Cheryl. Love you.
Love you too. You know I do. Tell Elizabeth. Anyway, the one thing that came to mind when I heard that question was that we are not little puppets dancing on a string for God to, God's amusement. We are given volition, which is free will. And because there is only one power, we have the decision, we have the choice of how we use it. We can use it for good or we can use it for not so good. But it's all comes back to us. Like Brad said, it's us being responsible for our actions and for what we're doing. So if you see things going on around in the world and some people want to call it evil, there's no evil. That's just a good excuse for bad behavior. If you're misbehaving and you're not using your power correctly, then you're going to cause a lot of mayhem in your life and other people's life as well. But just go back to the point that we have free will. We get to decide how we live our lives. We get to decide what we create. And so if things aren't looking good around you, start right here. Right here. Look, see what's going on in there, and then see what changes once you recognize and you do something about your behavior or whatever your thinking is or whatever your perception is. But just remember, we're free to think any way we want to.
I think this might be an interesting test of our thinking and our expressing ourselves. So the same person said that we've misinterpreted their use of the word God. They see God as nature unfolding. So I know the six can address this. So the original question was why do we think that God has allowed mankind's thinking to evolve in such a way as to be so critical of self and others? And they're defining God as nature unfolding. So who would like to chew on that a little bit? Given
cool,
their
that's awesome. And sorry, I didn't recognize that ahead of time. And I'm really clear that's where probably anybody who's participating in this is coming from. And we still, so say the phrase again, Dale.
the which part of it? The
first question.
The first question. The first question was
first comment. Yeah.
Given that God is love and compassion, why do you think that God has allowed mankind's thinking to evolve in such a way as to be so critical of self and others?
So the word was allowed.
Correct.
So an entity has allowed, and that's what triggered me. Awesome person listening. So it's that really subtle languaging of, oh, nothing has allowed. What if it just is? But I'm clear. If you and I could have 6 hours of discussion, and we would both be really clear that we think God is all there is, and it's all nature, and it's all amazing, and everything out there, and we still have those little words of, I was given. Why is spirit allowing this to happen? Those kind of little subtle languages. So it's just like an expansion. It's like something happened. We said something. How can we embrace what was and then also expand a little more? and just those little language. And it's not just semantics, right? Because it triggered within me, I'm clear I reacted, but it triggered within me that level of comment. So thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for contributing to it, person out there.
So maybe the question is, why have we allowed? Why have we allowed? Given that we are God, we are the expression of God, we are that energy. Why have we chosen to use it in a way that isn't as constructive as it could be? And I think Ernest Holmes would say it's simply out of ignorance, out of not understanding who we are. That's it. You know, we can use electricity to fry an egg or to electrocute ourselves. I mean, it's all about how do you use it. It is that one energy that can be used constructively or deconstructively. So why have we used it out of ignorance? It's just simply we need to forgive ourselves because we didn't understand it. That's all. And now that we do, we can use it in a constructive and loving manner. So it's not how has God, we are God. We have allowed this to happen. And now we can make a different choice. Now that we understand how it works, we can use it constructively and for good.
So as Lori said, we can always make a different choice. So as we are getting close to the end of our time together, I wanted to jump back in with just some practical spirituality around self-compassion, because we called our talk today expanding and enhancing self-compassion. And that means that there are times that we need to jump back in and regain our self-compassion, make a different choice. And so from a practical standpoint, what are some of the ways that we can do that? And I like to call one of the ways I'm going to suggest is taking a self-compassion break. And the first step in taking a self-compassion break could be finding a physical gesture that's soothing to you. And well, why is that? Well, it's because self-compassion actually taps into the mammalian caregiving system, and that releases all kinds of good feeling hormones. And sometimes people find that putting both hands on their heart center works really well here. But what if you're in public? And what if that gesture might not make sense for where you are? Well, I can share that many veterans that practice self-compassion around PTSD simply cross their arms in front of their body. It can be low, it can be high. It's just a symbolic gesture. They can feel the warmth and the care that's moving through their arms. And you can experiment a bit in giving this self-hug to find out what works for you. And the idea behind the self-compassion break is that when you find yourself struggling emotionally, and Lori talked earlier about how we all have those triggers, those feelings that let us know this is where we are, you can use this physical gesture or another one for comfort. And you can use that along with a mantra or a series of words that evoke the feelings of self-compassion for you. So a simple example would be, may I be kind to myself in this moment. So feeling the warmth of your gesture and the kindness and care in your words is regaining your self-compassion. And you can use this technique in the heat of the moment, or you can use it as a meditation as your circumstances allow. But the compassion break is what I call a portable friend. You can use it anywhere. And it's a reminder to you to be compassionate towards yourself, to regain self-compassion. And you can carry it with you each day as you practice integrating self-compassion into your daily life. I'm wondering if any of my cohorts have any other suggestions for taking a compassion break.
I love that, Gail, because there's your thymus gland, I think, is right here. And that's what I do. I like, all I do, and you can do it anywhere because no one knows what you're doing. You can just go and pretend like you're coughing. But just to tap there, I think that's great. It just kind of brings you into that space of love. and shifts you. It shifts the consciousness around it. Something else I like to do is I like to do something nice for myself as well, like whether it's something that I find like a positive reinforcement, whether it's to have like a treat or watch something or listen to good music, just to give myself a gift of good. I think that helps us tell ourselves that we love ourselves and we care about ourselves. And I know for maybe some of us on the panel, we tend to be really hardworking and maybe we don't give ourselves our breaks and all the stuff we're doing. But I find that taking that 5 or 10 minutes away from whatever, I'm working on, where I'm trying to drive myself and I'm, maybe getting too hard on myself, taking 5 or 10 minutes just to break from that allows me to come back so much more engaged and in the flow of creativity. And it's such an act of kindness. And I think, we talk about random act of kindness to others. Let's do random acts of kindness to ourselves. What a shift, right? That's my closing on that.
I love that. I love both those suggestions. I do this. I pat myself on the shoulder. I don't know why, but that just works for me. It's like, okay, you're doing all right. Keep going. You're doing okay. And that's just a sign for me to take a breath. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you all, and thank everyone who joined us here this morning and anyone who watches us in the future. It is time to begin to wrap up, and as we do so, you will find, if you are on our website, a donate button. And we would so appreciate any contribution you make. It is a thumbs up for us if you contribute during our show, that the show has added value to you and fed you in some way. It also supports the center to continually 7 days a week bring you programming during this time, which I think is extraordinary. I'm going to guess we're one of the few centers out there doing 7 days a week, and it is not without cost. So if you feel compelled, please click that button. And we have a lot coming up this week. Tomorrow, Reverend Charles is on. Every single day, we are on at 10. It's very easy to remember. So all of these are on at 10. Tomorrow, Reverend Charles is welcoming Dr. Will Coleman, and he will be interviewing and having a conversation with him. Fridays is now Life on Love with Reverend Charles, and it's a time to get to know him, ask him questions. He's telling wonderful stories of his travels, and it's a really intimate time with him. So I invite you to join Reverend Charles for that. On every Saturday, we have meditation. Every Sunday, of course, is Sunday service, and Monday we begin the whole thing again. We also have 2 very special things going on right now. On Sundays, after service, our normal service ending time, 11 a.m., we are having a virtual prayer room. And you can just go to the website and click on the link, and you will be brought to a Zoom room where you will have a personal 1-minute miracle with a practitioner. It's very private, and we've really worked hard to create a sacred space. And so please take advantage of that. We all so miss praying with the congregation. We're just very excited about this. And then we have something really special beginning next Wednesday, and it's before, after, and even later after the Sensational 6, the Power of 8, which is all about intention and the power of group intention. And all of us are facilitating those. And we did one together that was, oh my goodness. I think Dale said it perfectly. It could become addictive. It was the most amazing experience. So please go to the website. It's very easy to sign up. You just click on, you can choose your time. Next Wednesday, we'll be meeting at 8, noon, and 6. So please pick one of those times and you will be put with a group. And we're doing standalones right now, but these could evolve into so many different directions. Again, both of those things are new, and please avail yourself of them. So I think that pretty much brings us to our end. Oh, Reverend Dale, or
Soon to be Reverend at CSLPD. I just want to tell everybody that over the next 3 weeks on Mondays and Thursdays at 10, each of us is going to be interviewed by Reverend Charles. And it's all about telling you our stories and you asking questions of us. It's just our time to be personal with you so you get to know us. So I just wanted to put that out there because it starts next Monday. And I think Brad is first up on, no, William, you're up first on Monday. And I think Gail, you're Thursday. Is that correct, next week? Yes, beautiful. So tune in. You want to see what made us the people that we are today. Tune in because you'll be inspired by each of us. I know. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you,
Lori, just
Dale.
as a quick note too, the third time for our Sensationals, for our Power of 8 group on Wednesday is actually 6:30.
Oh, thank you for that correction.
6:37.
Thank you. All right. Well, we just want you to know how much we appreciate you spending time with us. And so with that, we're going to do a quick closing. And what I affirm and I know is that the energy here today was based in absolute pure love, love of self, love of each other, this vibration of good that simply ripples out and is available in every single moment. I know that everything that was spoken here today was spoken from that place of understanding who we are. And I know it continues to bless everyone who has listened here today and everyone who will listen in the future. And I am so, so incredibly grateful for this sensational 6, for our time together and for our connection with all of you. And I simply release my word as law, knowing it is done, and so it is. Namaste, everyone.